My brother Derek has always possessed an almost supernatural ability to detect when someone else is about to have a moment, and more importantly, an even more refined talent for ensuring that moment gets completely hijacked before it can fully form. Whether it was a family dinner where I was about to share good news, a birthday party that wasn't his, or just a simple conversation that dared to focus on anyone other than him, Derek had this internal radar that would start beeping the second attention threatened to land somewhere other than directly on his perfectly groomed head. And if you ever had the audacity to point this out, to suggest that maybe his timing seemed a little too convenient, a little too calculated, he'd give you this wounded expression that belonged in a Renaissance painting, run his hand through his hair in that practiced way that made him look like he'd just stepped off a magazine cover, and say something like, "I can't help it if interesting things happen to me." As if orchestrating these moments wasn't a skill he'd been honing since he learned to walk. So when I was standing at the podium at the Marriott in downtown Seattle, 3 minutes into my maid of honor speech at my best friend Emma's wedding, watching as heads began to turn toward the back of the reception hall, I felt that familiar knot form in my stomach. The one that had been forming since childhood, whenever Derek's presence was about to turn someone else's spotlight into his personal stage. I didn't stop talking. I'd learned that lesson the hard way over the years. The moment you acknowledge his entrance, the moment you give him even a fraction of your attention, the entire room becomes his theater, and everyone else becomes his unwitting audience. So I kept talking about Emma and Jake's love story, even as I heard the unmistakable sound of Derek's voice carrying across the room, somehow managing to be both apologetic and attention-grabbing at the same time. "So sorry I'm late, everyone. Just got off a conference call with Tokyo. You know how international business is. No rest for the wicked." Of course it was Tokyo. Of course it was international business. Of course Derek managed to make his tardiness sound like evidence of his own importance, rather than simple disrespect for Emma's wedding day. But here's what took me 31 years to fully understand about Derek. It was never enough for him to simply be successful or charming or the center of attention. His joy had to be derived from the specific act of redirecting focus away from someone else. It wasn't sufficient to have good news. He had to deliver it during someone else's moment. It wasn't enough to be accomplished. He had to ensure his accomplishments were always discussed in the context of overshadowing someone else's achievements. When I finished my speech to warm applause, I walked back to the head table where my boyfriend Michael was sitting, with an expression I'd come to recognize over our 2 years together. It was the look that said, "I see what's happening here, I know you see it too, and I'm going to follow your lead on how to handle this." Derek materialized beside me before I'd even fully sat down, wrapping me in one of his signature embraces that always felt more like a performance piece than genuine affection. "Sophia, beautiful speech as always. Sorry I missed the beginning, couldn't be helped. The Yamamoto account was having a crisis and they specifically requested me to handle it. You know how it is when you're the go-to person for the big clients." He was wearing his most expensive suit, the charcoal Armani that he'd mentioned the cost of at least 8 times since purchasing it. His cologne was that ridiculously overpriced stuff that smelled like it cost more per bottle than most people's rent. And his watch. Jesus, his watch was practically a beacon, catching the light every time he gestured, which was constantly. "It's fine," I said, because that's what I'd been programmed to say since childhood. "It's fine. Don't make a scene. Keep the peace." Derek's just being Derek. But as he launched into an elaborate tale about his business heroics, complete with dramatic pauses and name drops that were clearly intended to impress the other wedding guests, I found myself thinking about all the other times he'd pulled this exact same routine. My college graduation, where he showed up during the ceremony with a story about helping a stranded motorist, somehow managing to get himself interviewed by a local news reporter who was covering the graduation, turning my academic achievement into a human interest piece about Derek's Good Samaritanism. My promotion party 3 years ago, where he arrived mid-celebration with news that he'd just been headhunted for a position in New York, turning my career milestone into an impromptu going-away party for him. My birthday dinner last year, where he showed up an hour late with an elaborate story about getting stuck in traffic because he'd stopped to help at a car accident, bringing with him a woman he'd apparently met at the scene who spent the entire dinner talking about what a hero Derek was. Each time, I'd smiled and nodded and played the role of the supportive sister who was just so proud of her successful, charismatic, endlessly fascinating brother. Each time, I'd told myself that Derek didn't mean anything by it, that he was just living his dramatic life, and sometimes that drama spilled over into other people's moments. But sitting there at Emma's wedding, watching him gesture dramatically while describing how he single-handedly saved the Yamamoto deal, I realized something that hit me like a physical blow. Derek didn't have bad timing. He had perfect timing. He just used it to ensure that no one else's joy ever felt completely uninterrupted. The reception continued around us, but I felt like I was watching it through glass. I smiled when people approached our table. I laughed at Derek's increasingly elaborate stories. I danced when Michael asked me to dance. But underneath it all, I was calculating something that had never occurred to me before. What would happen if Derek didn't know when my moments were going to occur? After the reception, Michael and I went back to our hotel room. I sat on the edge of the bed, still in my bridesmaid dress, staring at my reflection in the mirror across from us. "You're thinking about something," Michael said, loosening his tie. "I'm thinking about Derek." "What about him?" I turned to look at Michael. This man who had never once tried to upstage me, who celebrated my victories without needing to add his own accomplishments to the conversation, who showed up when he said he would, and stayed present without needing to be the most interesting person in the room. "I'm thinking about what would happen if he didn't know about things ahead of time." Michael sat down beside me on the bed. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if I stopped telling him about important events until after they happened? What if I stopped giving him the opportunity to plan his grand entrances?" "That's actually not a bad idea. You don't owe him a roadmap to your life." It was such a simple statement, but it felt revolutionary. I didn't owe Derek a roadmap to my life. I didn't owe him advance notice of my moments so he could plan his disruptions. I didn't owe him the courtesy warnings that had been enabling his behavior for 3 decades. "I want to try something," I said. "What kind of something?" I looked at Michael, feeling something shift inside my chest, something that felt like the first breath after holding it for too long. "I want to see what happens when Derek has to react to my life instead of orchestrating his responses to it." 3 weeks later, I got the call I'd been hoping for since I started at Morrison & Associates 2 years ago. Senior partner. Corner office. Salary increase that would change everything about how Michael and I could plan our future. Normally, Derek would have been the first person I called. Not because we were particularly close, but because I'd been conditioned since childhood to share important news with family immediately, to include everyone in every milestone, to make sure no one felt left out. Instead, I called Michael. Then I called Emma. Then I called my college roommate who lived in Portland. I made dinner reservations at our favorite restaurant. I bought champagne. I planned a quiet celebration for the two of us. I didn't post about it on social media. I didn't mention it in the family group chat. I didn't call my parents. I just held it close. Let it be mine for a while. It felt strange at first, almost selfish. I'd been programmed to broadcast my good news immediately, to share every moment with family, to make sure everyone was included in every experience. But as the days passed and the partnership offer sat in my email inbox, unannounced and unshared, I began to understand something I'd never experienced before. The pure, uncomplicated joy of success that belonged entirely to me. Derek called on Tuesday, his usual weekly check-in that always felt more like reconnaissance than genuine interest in my life. "Hey, Soph, what's new in the world of corporate law? Anything exciting happening?" For a moment, I felt that familiar urge to spill everything, to share my news, and bask in whatever version of congratulations Derek would offer before inevitably pivoting to his own recent achievements. Instead, I heard myself saying, "Oh, same old cases, same old clients. How are things with you?" And just like clockwork, Derek launched into a 20-minute monologue about his latest business trip, the important client he was courting, the conference he'd been invited to speak at in Las Vegas, and the promotion he was expecting any day now. When we hung up, I felt something I'd never experienced after a conversation with Derek. Peace. The absence of that familiar knot in my stomach that formed whenever I shared good news, only to watch it get immediately overshadowed by Derek's bigger, better, more dramatic achievements. I started my new position the following Monday, and I managed to keep it to myself for 3 entire weeks. 3 weeks of learning my new responsibilities, settling into my corner office, and slowly transforming my entire approach to practicing law, all without a single family member knowing what I was doing. It was during my 4th week as senior partner that I met Caroline, another lawyer who worked at a competing firm. We'd been introduced at a bar association event, and over coffee, she made an observation that would stick with me for months. "You seem different from the other partners I know," she said during one of our weekly coffee meetings. "More grounded, I guess. Like you're not performing your success for anyone." I laughed, surprised by her observation. "That's oddly specific." "I used to have that same energy," she said, "always looking over my shoulder, always preparing for someone to minimize my achievements or find a way to make them about themselves. Took me years to realize I was living my professional life in reaction to my brother." The word brother hit me like lightning. "Your brother?" Classic attention seeker, everything had to revolve around him. Every family dinner, every holiday, every milestone in my life became an opportunity for him to demonstrate how much more interesting his life was. I stared at her, feeling seen in a way that was both comforting and unsettling. What did you do about it? I stopped giving him material to work with, Caroline said simply. Not out of spite, just out of self-preservation. I realized I was basically providing him with a script for upstaging me. That night, I called Michael from my office after everyone else had gone home. I think I'm starting to understand something about myself, I said. What's that? I think I've been living my life as a reaction to Derek instead of living it as myself. There was a pause on the other end of the line, the kind of pause that meant Michael was choosing his words carefully. How does that realization feel? Liberating, I said without hesitation, and also kind of sad. Sad how? I looked out my corner office window at the Seattle skyline, thinking about all the achievements that had been diminished, all the moments that had been interrupted, all the celebrations that had been hijacked by Derek's need to be the most important person in every room. Sad that it took me 31 years to figure out that I was allowed to have experiences without him. The first real test came in November when Michael proposed. He'd planned it perfectly. Dinner at the restaurant where we'd had our first date, followed by a walk along the waterfront, where he got down on one knee as the sun was setting over Elliott Bay. It was perfect. Romantic, intimate, completely ours. And for the first time in my adult life, when something wonderful happened to me, my first instinct wasn't to immediately share it with my family. Instead, Michael and I spent the evening calling his parents, then Emma, then my college friends. We posted a single photo on Instagram with a simple caption. We made plans to celebrate properly over the weekend, just the two of us. I didn't call Derek. I didn't text him. I didn't even mention it in the family group chat. The next morning, my phone started buzzing at 7 a.m. Derek had seen the Instagram post. Sophia! Holy shit! When did this happen? Why didn't you call me? I can't believe I had to find out about my own sister's engagement on social media. His voice had that edge it got when things didn't go according to his plan, when the world dared to operate without his input or orchestration. It just happened last night, I said calmly. We wanted to keep it quiet at first. Quiet from your own brother? Sophie, I'm hurt. I mean, I'm happy for you, obviously, but I'm hurt. We tell each other everything. Do we? I thought. When was the last time Derek told me about something important before using it to upstage someone else? I'm sorry you feel hurt, I said. And I meant it. But this is how Michael and I wanted to handle it. Well, we need to celebrate. I'll make reservations somewhere amazing. I know this place downtown that just got written up in Food and Wine. The chef is actually a friend of mine. I helped him secure some investors for his restaurant group. And there it was. Even my engagement had to become a story about Derek's connections and influence. That's sweet of you to offer, but Michael and I already have plans. Plans? What kind of plans? Come on, Sophie. This is huge news. We need to do this right. I took a breath, feeling that familiar pressure to accommodate Derek's need to be involved in everything, to make every celebration about him in some way. We're going to keep it small, I said. Just us. The silence that followed was longer than usual, and when Derek finally spoke, his voice was different. Smaller. Just us? What about family? Heh. Derek, I said gently. This is our engagement. We get to decide how to celebrate it. After we hung up, I sat in my office for a long time, staring out at the city and thinking about how different that conversation had felt from every other major life announcement I'd made. For the first time, I hadn't immediately capitulated to Derek's need to be involved. I hadn't let him turn my moment into his production. And the strangest part was that I didn't feel guilty about it. I felt protective. Protective of my own joy, my own experience, my own right to celebrate my life on my own terms. Michael and I spent that weekend in a cabin in the San Juan Islands, completely disconnected from phones and social media and family drama. We hiked, we cooked, we talked about our future, we made love, we slept in until noon. It was perfect in its simplicity, in its complete focus on us and our happiness. On Sunday evening, as we were driving back to Seattle, Michael asked me how I was feeling about everything. Different, I said. Like I'm finally learning to live my own life instead of constantly reacting to Derek's need to be the star of everyone else's story. How does it feel to set that boundary? I thought about it, watching the evergreen trees blur past the car window. It feels like coming home to myself. But Derek, predictably, wasn't finished. Not even close. Over the next few weeks, he launched what I privately called Operation Reconciliation, a carefully orchestrated campaign designed to make me feel guilty for excluding him from my engagement celebration and to reestablish his role as the central figure in all family events. First came the calls. Daily calls, sometimes twice daily, ostensibly to check in, but really to fish for information about wedding planning, to offer unsolicited advice, and to insert himself into every decision Michael and I were trying to make privately. Have you thought about venues? Because I have connections at several places in the city. I could make some calls. What's your budget looking like? Because I know some vendors who owe me favors. Are you thinking spring or summer? Because I might have some conflicts with work travel, and obviously I'll need to plan around this. When the daily calls didn't achieve the desired effect, namely, me begging for his involvement and apologizing for my previous exclusion, Derek escalated to phase 2, family manipulation. Suddenly, my parents were calling with concerns. Derek says you're not including him in your wedding planning. He's really hurt, Sophie. You know how much family means to him. Your brother just wants to help. He has so many connections that could be useful. Why are you shutting him out? The subtext was clear. I was being unreasonable, selfish, cruel to my poor brother, who only wanted to support me. It was the same dynamic that had governed our childhood. Derek's feelings were always the most important. Derek's needs always took precedence, and it was everyone else's job to accommodate his emotional requirements. But for the first time in my life, I didn't immediately fold under the pressure. I'm not shutting Derek out, I told my mother during one of these calls. Michael and I are planning our wedding ourselves. That's what we want. But Derek has such good taste, and he knows so many people. Mom, I said firmly, this is our wedding. We get to decide how to plan it. Phase 3 of Derek's campaign was the most insidious. He started showing up. At my office, at my favorite coffee shop, at the grocery store I frequented. Always with some excuse. He was in the neighborhood, or meeting a client nearby, but clearly designed to force interactions and reassert his presence in my daily life. Sophie, what a coincidence. I was just meeting with a potential investor at the building next door. How's the wedding planning going? Have you made any decisions yet? Each encounter felt like a test, a challenge to see if I would crack under the pressure and revert to our old dynamic. And I'll admit, there were moments when it would have been easier to just give in, to let Derek take over the planning and turn our wedding into another production starring him. But every time I felt myself wavering, I would remember that weekend in the San Juan Islands. The peace, the simplicity, the joy that belonged entirely to Michael and me. And I would remind myself that I deserved to have that same peace on my wedding day. The confrontation finally came in December, at our parents' annual Christmas party. I should have seen it coming. Derek always saved his biggest performances for times when he had a captive audience. But I was caught off guard by the timing and the audacity of what he did. Michael and I had arrived early to help with preparations. I was in the kitchen, arranging appetizers on serving platters, when Derek swept in with his usual dramatic flair. Sophie, perfect timing. I have something to tell everyone, and I wanted you to hear it first. I looked up from the shrimp ring I was arranging, already feeling that familiar knot forming in my stomach. What's that, Derek? He was practically vibrating with excitement, his eyes bright with that particular kind of glee he got when he was about to drop a bombshell. I'm moving to London. I got offered a position with a major international firm, and I leave in February. Right before your wedding, actually, so we'll need to move the date up if you want me there. The shrimp ring slipped from my hands and clattered onto the counter. I stared at Derek, processing what he just said, understanding the magnitude of what he was doing. He wasn't just announcing a major life change. He was using his announcement to hijack my wedding timeline, to force me to reorganize my plans around his schedule, to make my wedding about his career move. And he was doing it in front of our parents, with the implicit expectation that everyone would immediately start discussing how to accommodate Derek's new situation, how to adjust the wedding plans to work around his departure date. London, I said slowly. That's big news, Derek. I know, it's incredible, right? The opportunity of a lifetime. The only problem is the timing, obviously. But I'm sure you and Michael can move things up a few months. It's not that big a deal to change a wedding date, right? Our mother had come into the kitchen at some point during this conversation, and she was looking between Derek and me with that expression she got when she was trying to manage a family crisis. Oh my, she said. Well, this is certainly unexpected. Sophie, would it be possible to move the wedding up? I mean, it would be such a shame if Derek couldn't be there. And there it was. The same pattern that had governed my entire life. Derek creates a situation. Everyone else adjusts to accommodate Derek's needs, and somehow I'm expected to be grateful for the chaos he's introduced into my carefully planned life. But this time, something was different. This time, I didn't feel the familiar panic, the immediate rush to problem solve and accommodate and make everything work for everyone else. Instead, I felt a clarity so sharp it was almost painful. No, I said. Derek blinked, clearly not having expected that response. No? No, I won't be moving my wedding date. Michael and I have been planning for June for months. We've booked the venue, sent save the dates, made deposits. We're not changing our plans. But Sophie, my mother started, it's Derek's career. And it's my wedding, I said, looking directly at Derek. You're choosing to take a job that conflicts with my wedding date. That's your choice. But I'm not reorganizing my life around your career decisions. The silence in the kitchen was absolute. I could hear the party continuing in the living room. Laughter, conversation, Christmas music. But in our little bubble of family drama, time seemed suspended. Derek's face went through several expressions. Surprise, hurt, anger. before settling on wounded confusion. I can't believe you won't move your wedding date for your own brother. I can't believe you took a job that conflicts with my wedding date without discussing it with me first. I didn't know about the job when you set the date. You didn't know about it when you told me 5 minutes ago that I should change my plans to accommodate your timeline? Derek stared at me, and I could see him processing the fact that his usual tactics weren't working, that I wasn't collapsing under the emotional pressure he was applying. This isn't like you, Sophie, he said finally. You're not usually so selfish. And there it was. The word that had been used to control me my entire life. Selfish. The ultimate accusation in our family. The thing that was supposed to make me immediately back down and put everyone else's needs before my own. You're right, I said calmly. This isn't like me. Usually, I rearrange my entire life to make room for whatever drama you're creating. But not this time. I picked up the shrimp ring and walked past Derek toward the living room, leaving him and my mother standing in the kitchen with their mouths open. Michael was by the fireplace, talking to my father about something work-related. When he saw my face, he immediately excused himself and came over to me. Everything okay? I handed him the shrimp ring and leaned into his shoulder. Derek announced he's moving to London the week before our wedding and wants us to change the date. Michael was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. And what did you tell him? I told him no. Michael smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him all evening. Good. I'm proud of you. The party continued around us, but I could feel the undercurrent of tension, the whispered conversations about what had happened in the kitchen. Some people approached us with careful congratulations on our upcoming wedding. Others seemed to avoid us entirely, clearly uncomfortable with whatever family drama they'd heard about. Derek spent most of the evening holding court by the bar, telling anyone who would listen about his amazing job opportunity in London, and how disappointed he was that he might miss his sister's wedding because she wouldn't accommodate his schedule. I watched him from across the room, noting how he positioned himself as the victim in the narrative, how he managed to make his career advancement sound like a sacrifice he was making, how he gathered sympathy for being excluded from an event he was actively choosing not to attend. And for the first time in my life, watching Derek perform didn't make me anxious or guilty or desperate to fix the situation. It just made me sad. Sad that my brother was so addicted to being the center of attention that he couldn't simply be happy for me without finding a way to make my wedding about him. When Michael and I left the party that night, my mother walked us to the door with tears in her eyes. I don't understand what's happening to our family, she said. Derek is so hurt, and you seem so different. Can't you two just work this out? I hugged her, feeling genuinely sorry for her confusion, but not willing to sacrifice my boundaries to make her more comfortable. Mom, I love Derek, but I'm not responsible for managing his feelings anymore. This is my wedding, and I'm going to celebrate it on my terms. Over the next few weeks, the fallout continued. Derek left for London in January without attending our wedding. He sent a gift, an expensive vase that was clearly more about demonstrating his financial success than celebrating our marriage. But no personal note, no apology, no acknowledgement that his absence was his choice, rather than my fault. Some family members took sides. Others tried to remain neutral while clearly believing that I should have been more accommodating. A few people, surprisingly, reached out to tell me they thought I'd handled the situation well. My cousin Rachel called 2 weeks after Derek left. I wanted to tell you something, she said. What you did at Christmas, standing up to Derek, it was brave. I don't feel brave, I said. I feel like I broke our family. You didn't break anything. You just stopped pretending that the dysfunction was normal. Rachel's words stayed with me through the final months of wedding planning. And as June approached, I realized something that felt like a revelation. Planning my wedding without Derek's involvement, without his opinions and connections and dramatic interventions, had been peaceful in a way I'd never experienced. Michael and I chose vendors we liked, not ones who owed Derek favors. We planned a menu that reflected our tastes, not ones designed to impress Derek's sophisticated palate. We created a celebration that felt authentically ours, not a performance designed to accommodate Derek's need to be the most important person in the room. The wedding itself was beautiful. Small, intimate, filled with people who genuinely cared about our happiness rather than their own visibility. Emma gave a toast that made me cry. Michael's father welcomed me into their family with words that made me feel truly seen and valued. My parents, despite their lingering confusion about the Derek situation, were loving and supportive. During the reception, as Michael and I swayed together on the dance floor, he whispered in my ear, "How do you feel?" I looked around at our guests, friends and family members who were celebrating us without agenda, without drama, without anyone trying to redirect attention away from the couple being honored, and felt a peace so profound it took my breath away. "I feel like myself," I said. For the first time in my life, I feel completely like myself. 6 months later, I got an email from Derek. He was settled in London, enjoying his new job, dating someone he'd met at work. The message was chatty, superficially warm, with no mention of the wedding he'd missed or the family drama he'd created. At the end of the email, almost as an afterthought, he wrote, "I hope you'll consider visiting London sometime. It would be great to see you and catch up properly." I stared at the message for a long time, feeling the familiar pull to respond immediately, to smooth over the tension, to pretend that nothing had happened between us. Instead, I closed my laptop and went for a walk with Michael through our neighborhood. We'd bought a house together after the wedding. A small craftsman with a garden where I was learning to grow vegetables, and a porch where we drank coffee every Saturday morning. Derek emailed, I told Michael as we walked. What did he say? He wants us to visit London. No mention of the wedding. No acknowledgement of what happened. Just pretending everything is normal. What are you thinking? I considered the question as we walked past the houses in our neighborhood, each one representing someone's decision about how to build their life, how to create the kind of home and family and daily routine that reflected their values. I'm thinking that I don't want to go back to pretending, I said. I don't want to go back to the way things were. What do you want? I stopped walking and looked at Michael, this man who had never asked me to diminish myself to make him more comfortable, who celebrated my successes without needing to compete with them, who showed up consistently without dramatic flourishes or elaborate explanations. I want to keep building this life we're creating. I want to keep being myself instead of being Derek's supporting cast member. We continued our walk in comfortable silence, and when we got home, I wrote Derek a response. It was brief, polite, and honest. Derek, I'm glad you're enjoying London and your new job. I'm not ready for a visit yet, but I hope we can rebuild our relationship eventually, on healthier terms. I wish you well. I didn't apologize for not changing my wedding date. I didn't apologize for setting boundaries. I didn't promise to visit or invite him to visit us. I just told the truth about where I was and what I was ready for. His response came 2 days later. It was longer than his first email, with more of that wounded confusion that had characterized most of our interactions since I'd started setting boundaries. He wrote about how family was supposed to support each other, how he'd always been there for me, how disappointed he was that I was holding grudges instead of moving forward. I read it once, then deleted it. Because I'd finally learned the difference between holding grudges and protecting my peace. I wasn't angry with Derek anymore. I wasn't trying to punish him or prove a point or get revenge for all the times he'd hijacked my moments. I was just choosing to prioritize my own well-being over his need for drama and attention. And that choice, more than any confrontation or explanation or attempt at reconciliation, was how I finally finished with Derek's version of our relationship and started living my own life instead. The story doesn't end with a dramatic reconciliation or a complete estrangement. Derek is still my brother, and I still love him, but I love him from a distance that protects my own peace. He still sends emails occasionally, still tries to insert himself into my life through family members, still operates under the assumption that eventually I'll return to our old dynamic. But I won't. Because I've learned something that took me 31 years to understand. Love doesn't require you to set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. Family doesn't mean sacrificing your own joy to accommodate someone else's need for attention. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to stop enabling their worst impulses and let them figure out how to exist in the world without using you as their supporting cast. I don't know if Derek will ever change. I don't know if he'll ever understand why I stepped back from our relationship, or if he'll ever take responsibility for the patterns that made that distance necessary. But I know that I've changed. I know that I've finally learned to live my own life instead of reacting to his need to be the star of everyone else's story. And that knowledge, that hard-won peace, is worth more than any family harmony built on my willingness to disappear.